Hello and welcome. This is episode 19 of a podcast Engineer-to-Manager. I'm your host, Oleg Maestrenko. In this podcast, we explore what is engineering management, what are the challenges and opportunities. For this journey, I invite experienced engineering managers or technical leaders from different parts of the world. Today's guest is Nick Gicinto. Right, Nick? How are you doing?
You got it. Thank you.
Nice. So, Nick,
first try.
Thank you. I'm happy to have you here on the podcast and welcome to our conversation.
Oleg, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Let's start a little bit about your journey and your career. I got prepared and I understand that you started at the CIA a long time ago. As far as I understand, it was like 9/11.
Not that old.
9/11 around that time, right?
So I was inspired to pursue a career in the agency because of 9/11. I started a few years later because I completed a bachelor's and a master's degree before I went into the job.
Great. We'll talk a little bit about it later in the podcast. And then you went to Uber already to the senior level, which is like, wow,
That's right.
Going from the government to a senior level at a huge company, which we all know, and they're quite successful. And same senior level Tesla, and then going to security related companies, if I understand correctly, right? Like RiskIQ and Chainlink Labs. Then you kind of decided to, for me, it's change your career path and go to the college education to become a professor at Said University and William College, William Jewell College, to be correct.
That's yep, got it. Yeah, it's a bit of a non-traditional journey. And also I consider myself to be extremely blessed that I've had experience in government, private sector, and higher education. I don't know how many other sectors there are left to try. But if you can think of some, then we'll discuss maybe whether I'll have one of those in my future.
Well, possibly you can go to right now something to do with your hands, like your craftsmanship or something like that.
So I had those jobs when I was in school, before I graduated. That's how I paid for my bills and my education.
All right, so dear listeners, before we dive with Nick in their conversation, please like and subscribe this video and subscribe to the channel and make sure you have the ring bell to receive several nice conversations that are coming in the futures. And let's go back to you, Nick. So as you mentioned already, you started and you worked for 10 years in the agency, right? And there is a ton of information on the internet how you got there, but can you share like the 5 or like 10 word story how you got to the agency and what has been your inspiration to get on board?
10 words or less. I'll try my best. As we mentioned, 9/11 heavily influenced me and prompted my desire to serve. And the agency was not what I intended, although it appeared to be where I was best fit. So I pursued my education in a way that allowed me to be a successful or hopefully competitive candidate, and was fortunately hired on my first try.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And what do you think, or were there key quality that helped you to get to the agency? Like, we're not talking about the agency in specific, but let's say government institution, and they're talking about government institution. You can think of other security-related institutions in the U.S.
Well, I think it was important that I could articulate specifically why I wanted to work at the agency and why I wanted to work in operations for the agency. There are hundreds of thousands of applications, maybe more, that the agency receives per year. And to really boil it down to if the candidate is the right candidate, they need to be able to articulate why specifically they want to work there and not be, somewhere else that might have some of the same characteristics and would be much easier, perhaps, to get hired. So I'll give you an example. A number of people might say, well, I want to live and work abroad and travel overseas. Well, then you should be a flight attendant. There are many opportunities if that's what you want to do. So why do you want to work here specifically? And that was a question that I think my answer came deeply from my heart, and I think they understood that was genuine, and this was something I thought a lot about, that I had researched, and that I had committed to already even before I had the job.
This sounds for me like a very clear motivation and lots of soft skills that you developed before joining the agency, or is it wisdom that came after to kind of think over how it happened and why?
Yeah, I don't know how much wisdom anyone can have in their early 20s unless they really made a lot of mistakes and had to learn from those things early on. And I certainly was no stranger to that. I think that what I was able to do was demonstrate that I had a self-awareness, that I knew who I was, I knew what I was good at, I knew what I wasn't good at, and I wasn't afraid to say, I don't think I'm very strong in these areas, and I know that I need to improve, or I've been given feedback and I've actively listened and tried to improve, and didn't just approach the situation from a place of, I'm always right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. I also think demonstrating integrity is a really big deal in working at any company that has, sensitivity and a lot of confidentiality of things that they need to protect. So, for better or worse, I had some opportunities in my youth where I needed to demonstrate that I could do the right thing even when no one was looking. And that was a very important quality to be able to highlight.
Just to make it clear, so when you were looking for a job at agency, you also provided a set of hard skills that you managed. So did you go directly in their cybersecurity space, or you were trying something different?
Well, when you're hired into that particular part of the agency, you more or less find your place after you've joined and after they tell you this is where you're going to go. It's very much, it's an organization that prioritizes the needs of the mission. And so I had to be flexible in that. And I'll give you an example. I got a master's degree in defense and strategic studies. I wrote my thesis on focusing on China and China's military modernization, which, in the early mid to 2000, first decade of 2000, there was a lot of activity there. And so I spent a lot of time researching and writing. And when I got into the agency, I was asked to do something that had absolutely nothing to do with that. So that was okay. So showing that flexibility was important.
That sounds very interesting, actually, how it goes. Because first we started with a very soft skill of how you came to, agency, any company, and I think it's very important that people also focus on those soft skills, right, when they develop themselves. And second, you said when you went to the agency, you worked on something different that you had prior experience or knowledge, which is also very common in the current software world, right? When you receive a task or you've been checked on the onboarding against the knowledge that you have. But when you onboard, you basically start working on something completely different, or you might start working on something completely different. So you are being checked not against the knowledge that you will need, but against the knowledge that you have, like how you accepted it and how you perceived it and how can you interpret and share and use it. Basically, that's a very nice parallel that we have in the government sector and as an agency and the software industry or tech, right?
I think that's right. I think that many times all you can do is evaluate someone based on what they've done. I think hiring managers, if they're good, are thinking about hiring for someone's potential, knowing that they're going to be used in another area or another space, and do they have the ability to adapt and maintain resilience in trying something different. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
And when you went from the government sector to private, right, to Uber and Tesla afterwards, did you experience this as well? Or what has been the change for you, right?
It was quite a change. I even recall the first day walking into the office, Uber's office in Washington, D.C., and, walking into the building. No one stops me. No one checks an ID. Going to the elevator, walking by the front desk. Nothing. No no points of validation of who I was and whether I should be there. And that was a little scary to me. It was very different than what I'd experienced. And so, being hired to work in security, I thought, okay, well, immediately there's some things I'm going to have to change. So that was kind of my first experience. And then I think I lightened up a little bit and, realized that security was built into a number of other aspects of the business. And so while we could certainly always improve in those areas, and in fact, there was a really good physical security team at Uber that had a very difficult job just based on the size and scale of that company. But they did a great job, which then, allowed me to focus on the things that I was there to do. And then when I made that sort of transition into my actual role, what I found was that a number of the skills that I had acquired during my time in the government, while there wasn't necessarily a complete replication of those use cases, those skills were certainly valuable. One thing, I knew how to write. I knew how to write well. I knew how to write for brevity. And I also knew how to construct projects in a way that optimized for efficiency and success. Those skills immediately transitioned over. It just took me a little while to figure that out for myself because I was almost skeptical as to whether I would be a good fit. Fortunately, I was able to find my way, that new environment, and then eventually brought others from the government over to work with me as well. Only that time I could be more of an asset or a resource for them to transition because I didn't really have that for myself. I had to figure a lot more out. And so maybe it took me a little longer in that respect.
So basically what you're saying that from the agency career, you learned how to structure your thinking and how to make sure it's crisp and clear on the paper, or in terms of focusing on the project, how to think in how you will implement it. And then basically this skill has helped you a lot when you went to Uber, to the commerce, right? To make sure that your thoughts are clear and they are transparent to your team or your colleagues.
I think that's correct. And those were skills that I began to develop and hone even back to my undergraduate days. I went to a small private liberal arts college, and what I learned there was critical thinking skills. I had to learn to solve problems for myself, and that served me well, certainly in graduate school, and then also getting into the agency. I was able to write quickly. I was able to assess a situation, a problem set, the information that I had in front of me, and then articulate that in a way that showed a clear pathway, a story, a narrative, and I could do so in as few words as possible. That saved me a lot of time. I remember some of my colleagues in the early days, I would be getting up to go home and they would still be sitting there pounding the keys saying, what are you doing? Are you cheating? Are you reading somebody else's? What are you doing to get done so fast? And for me, I was just using the skills that I had learned at an earlier age, but continuing to build on those. So when I hit the private sector, it was very much second nature to me.
And when you're saying about putting something in paper or in written, where do you think is there edge between the common sense and the bureaucracy? Because lots of people tend to think about the bureaucracy when you start writing things, right? And they're putting them in written, though we all know about Amazon, right? And that they ask every idea to be defined on 4-paper document. So for some people, it sounds already like a huge bureaucracy, which is not agile, and all those are kind of things we hear in the software world. So where for you is there edge or the limit of writing and going to bureaucracy?
Well, we had a saying back in the agency that if it's not written down, it never happened. And that was a guiding principle to ensure that everyone was on the same page. And if you think about it, because of the stakes and the risk and the effort involved in the work that we were doing, there was really no room for miscommunication. And so while it can be bureaucratic, and I understand that. I mean, it was the government, so there's going to be some element of bureaucracy, and you can't really avoid that. I think it was important. It was important to get it right. And so although I would also say there was a commitment to expediting that process, right? And if the agency couldn't operate like that, it really can't do business. Not in the area of intelligence. Time matters, and so I think it was able to find a balance. The private sector, it's really been different and dependent on whether the organization is structured with a large hierarchy that requires a lot of approvals and authorities, or whether it has more of a flat structure where people are empowered and they understand their authorities and what they have the ability to do in the capacity of their daily job. It can work either way. I just tend to ensure that all of the boxes were appropriately checked, and the people that needed to know had the opportunity to see it, consider it, comment on it, approve it, decline it, what have you. And so I tend to take that with me to other teams and say, we got to make sure this is down on paper somewhere. It's nice, though, when you have tools like Google Docs where everyone can simultaneously collaborate on a document, right? Yeah. So I think that is helpful.
But well, I don't know how it's in your experience, but typically when people start collaborating, specifically in their government world, it creates a lot of additional discussions that there might not have happened, right? Because there are some people come with their strong opinion and they have power to say, well, I want to comment on this or that, and then it creates several additional sprints or several additional iterations, right, to finalize their idea and the document. They might be correct, but it's often the case, specifically in the government, at least from my experience, that they add their importance to the project, right? And they start commenting and talking, and that slows down the whole project.
I think it can. I think if you're searching for the best outcome, then the process matters. I also think how you approach other entities in the process matters. If you're approaching someone at the last minute to coordinate on something and then approve it, that's, I think, where you get the hold up. Because, we're just now seeing this. We had no idea. Have you considered this or that? Versus obtaining buy-in early in the process, I think is really critical to ensure that doesn't slow things down.
All right. So basically start talking to people and explaining what you want to do way before you start writing and giving them the document to approve, or, well, in this case, a comment, and just bury it under their comments or all that are coming from all the sides.
Yes.
We talk a little bit about your career, and then basically what we said, after the private sector, you came back to, well, not back, but to the college. Back in the sense that you were educated from the college, and then you were returned to your alma mater, right, as a professor. How does it feel? So it's like you're changing all the time. First government to private, then private to educational. So how does it feel for you?
So I thought I got my dream job at 24 years old when the agency hired me. And that was true. It was. I think, now that I'm further along in my career, I can say that coming back to my alma mater in a place where my mother went to college and I went to school. I remember being 5 years old, running around on that campus.
Whoa,
just very, very young, right? I can say I've gotten 2 dream jobs, right? If that's possible to say. Coming back to William Jewell has been truly an exceptional experience for me. I love the college. I love what it stands for. I love the people there, and I also feel as though I owe a debt of gratitude to William Jewell because of what it did for me as a student in positioning me to be successful in a career. not only to be successful, but really helping me to focus on where I should go because of who I was and because of what skills I had. I never considered the agency until I had a professor invest in me and say, I see this in you. You need to see, can you see this in yourself? And that opened up my eyes and then led me to where I eventually, went to work. So the ability to come back there to that environment, to participate and invest in students' lives the way that the college invested in me is an honor. It's a joy, and it really doesn't feel like work.
Let's talk a little bit about hardcore things, about the security domain where you are a professional. So let's start from the beginning. What made you think of going in the security domain, and how you came, approach this domain? Because this is a very specific and narrow topic, I would say.
Again, when I was in school and witnessed the event on 9/11, I felt a responsibility. I felt like I had been given a lot, been blessed with a lot, and I had a responsibility to do a lot. Mm-hmm. I was a political science major, so I was interested in geopolitics and international relations. I was interested in how states used their resources, their assets to engage with other states, and in many times that involved conflict. And security of nations became an interest of mine. And I furthered that by getting a master's degree in defense and strategic studies and really looking at the geopolitics of conflict. It was a very natural background for me to pursue a field or a career in intelligence. And I think I've felt a responsibility to protect, mm-hmm. Based on what I witnessed on September 11th. I didn't want that to happen again. I didn't want others to have to experience such a tragic loss. I don't like it when adversaries triumph. Mm-hmm. And if I have an ability, I'm also very naturally competitive. I played sports growing up. And so part of it is just me saying, we need to win. And winning means keeping people safe. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of why I got into this.
So you're coming from more organizational in the cybersecurity, like the processes or their politics or their connections between people, but not like the hacking stuff to go into systems. Is that correct, my understanding?
Yeah, I've never been an engineer, and I've never sat at the terminal to dive in on network forensics or to look at anything offensive. How I got into this specifically was really the work that I did in the private sector, because the companies Uber, Tesla in particular have a very important intellectual property set that they have to protect, they must protect. That can also go into reputation. That can go into plans and intentions of the business, and there's competitors, and these are very competitive industries and disruptive industries that both of these companies find themselves. They are no stranger to having information be stolen or leaked either to the press or to competitors or maybe to even foreign governments. And I was in a unique position of having served previously in the intelligence community. I represented the type of thinking that our adversaries presented mm-hmm. to the company. And so I naturally got into the areas of insider threat and the protection of intellectual property. In the government, we kind of call that counterintelligence. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In the private sector, it's enterprise risk management. It's really the same. It's the same sort of thing. And so how is data potentially exfiltrated? It can certainly be from a human just taking in knowledge, information, and reporting it. More commonly, though, it's the exfiltration of data via some type of digital medium. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I get into cyber that way as I start to learn those types of threats and how they can pose problems for companies in protecting their information. And it became just a natural part of my role each day to work with information security teams, to work with physical security teams, and to work with the business on how to understand, to bring these entities together in order to protect information.
You mentioned two things that I want to put on the table and go one by one. So first one, you said about people and basically people sharing the information or leaking the information. You didn't mention leaking, but I guess that's what you mean.
I think, yeah, that was implied.
Yeah, and the second thing is you said there is a data and there are tools, I guess, that you are using to analyze this data and see how it's protected. So let's go with the people first and then come back to tools or once we finish with the people. Like if people are done, then we can talk about machines. Okay. Like in the future will happen or not.
We'll see.
We'll see. So basically, as far as I understand, and this is a typical knowledge that's shared, that the human is the weakest link in the security domain, because you can protect systems, though all the systems can be broken, or but the human you cannot protect, right? And you share with the human lots of information. You trust the person, and trust is often something that we use with the guests when we talk about the team structure, right? You have to trust your people on the team. You have to share with them the common goal. And when we talk from their cybersecurity or security point of view, is the trust in the team something different that you put in the trust? And how do you build the trust with a human as a part of the team in their organization?
Trust is the currency in the security world, from my experience. If you're not trusted, you don't have you're not effective in the job, and you probably don't have a job. And so, one, you have to hire well. Mm-hmm. You have to hire extremely well. A bad hire could wreck everything in your operation. So you need to be able, in the hiring process, to really assess whether or not the person is someone who is deserving of that trust through an offer. And then you have to constantly reinforce good behaviors and trust as a personnel manager, because people have various motivations and needs. Some people need more praise. Some people need just more time or involvement. Some people feel more trusted if you leave them alone.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I think you have to invest in understanding what is it that builds trust with that particular team member. And also, you have to put the right policies in place to be able to hold people accountable. And so clarity of processes and policy is really important for trust, because no one wants an ambiguous sort of guideline. They don't want to know that they may inadvertently do something that causes a loss of trust, but it really wasn't made clear what was permissible. So I think you have to set the boundaries. And then if everyone knows clearly where the boundaries are, they understand if they operate within those boundaries, that will maintain trust. There's a number of things you have to think about. But I think also the most important thing, and I'll lean on an author named Brené Brown for this, she's written many books, I think as many as 6 are New York Times bestsellers, but she writes a common theme, and I'll reference her book, Dare to Lead, where she talks about the power of vulnerability. And many people are under the impression that a Viking mindset of leadership is the way to command, your employees and your team. Strong, decisive, impenetrable, a wall, just steady, a rock. I think what studies have shown and what Brené Brown talks about is that type of mindset really views the world in 2 ways. There are winners and there are losers. And the losers are weak, the losers are soft, the winners are just like the Viking. And that's fundamentally not how normal cultures operate. That may be how you operate in an emergency situation when you need quick, decisive, can't think, can't argue, just must go. That makes sense. But when you take that emergency off the table, how do people just need to interact together? And the ability for leaders to show vulnerability is the most fundamental way to build trust, according to Brené Brown. And I think that's accurate. I think when you are vulnerable, you are giving trust to that person to take that information and use it however they want. And if they use it properly and don't misuse it, then I think that's the opportunity to build real trust between individuals. And so I subscribe to that as the method for building trust in teams.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And let's imagine a situation when a person shares something that is not allowed by the policy, but I share this with you because I trust you, right? And I want to show this trust not in only saying, but as an acting. And but this violates a policy. Would it be the correct way of building the trust, or not really?
Well, I think that's integrity. If they're doing something where they violated a policy and they're coming forward about that, because I think, C.S. Lewis said, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. Mm-hmm. And so if you violated something and maybe, no one would ever know unless you said something, an employee who comes forward and demonstrates that's an employee that I want on my team. That's someone that I can trust because they were willing to admit that they made a mistake. Mm-hmm. Now, there may still be consequences for that mistake, but I also I have the same philosophy with my children, where I tell them, if you tell me the truth, I'm not going to be upset. But people make the cover up worse than the crime, and that's where you get in trouble. And those are the people I don't want to work with.
And how do you understand that? Well, when you hire, right? Because we talked about hiring people, and you said you have to check, verify them. Of course, there are background checks that are running when you are onboarded or you're being interviewed. But how do you check their absence of such integrity? Because for some people, it might not be the absence of integrity. They might take this okay because I understand this. I work with this person. I don't share with him or her this information on day one. But with the time, I understand this is a good team member. I trust him or her. I want to show him some additional information kind of from under the cover, which is not available to a specific person.
Well, I think in the hiring process, if you want to assess whether or not you could have trust in that person, whether or not they have integrity, I think you have to ask them for examples of when they've screwed up and they did the right thing. Mm-hmm. I tend to believe that previous behavior is an indicator of future behavior. We learn habits and patterns, and sometimes those neural pathways get set a certain way. Now, people can change and they can learn. I believe that. But I want to know, well, give me a time when you really messed up or you did something that if you hadn't said it to anyone, no one would have ever found out. What did you do and how did you handle it? I would want to know that. And I would also want to ask somebody to evaluate themselves from a strength and a weakness perspective. Mm-hmm. And how they answer that question tells me a lot. I think it's really easy for people to talk about themselves and highlight what they believe to be their strongest attributes. I find that it's more difficult for someone to be willing and vulnerable enough to share their weaknesses. That's a test in that way, because that sharing a weakness and admitting a weakness in a job interview is vulnerability. You recognize that, well, I may say something that they don't like, and that may be why I did the job. So that shows me that someone is willing to be vulnerable, which for me is a trust building exercise. Mm-hmm. It's also really, even if someone is going to game the system and say, well, let me talk about things I'm terrible at. Sometimes I'm a perfectionist, or sometimes, man, I just work too much. Sometimes,
you're not being honest. You're not being honest, Nick.
we call those humble brags, right? And so what you're trying to do is passive aggressively talk about a weakness, but you're actually accentuating, a positive or something an employer would hear. We don't like those things, and I tend to see through those, and that tells me two potential things. One, this person doesn't know themselves well. They haven't spent time really thinking about where they need to improve. Perhaps they've never been given feedback, or perhaps they were given it and they didn't believe it, or they didn't accept it. The other thing it tells me is this person isn't willing to be vulnerable, and it's going to be hard to build trust.
You know, when you ask such a person during the interview, what is your weakness? It's indeed a hard question to answer and build and open up. So what I've heard as an advice for a manager who is hiring to say like, look, Nick, I don't like surprises. Can you share with me what could be something that you do that might surprise me that I don't like, right? It's not talking about the person, but talking about the situation that this person might create. And when you ask a person about weakness, what is your approach? Would you like go directly or kind of trying to go around?
So first of all, I really like the way you phrased that question. I think that's a good question to disarm someone, so they don't take it necessarily so personally. If that's your goal, I also don't mind the direct approach because that tends to be how I operate. Mm-hmm. And if that approach is uncomfortable for the person, then maybe it's not a good fit, for either party. Well, what I tend to do is ask someone how a couple of adjectives. So I'm looking for one word, two adjectives that, two words, I guess, that a friend would use to describe them. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting. So there's little like sub threads in these questions, because if you can't boil it down to an adjectives, well, that tells me you may have a problem with brevity, and maybe have a problem with condensing things in an efficient way. So I asked that question. I sort of, I listen to the answer, of course. Maybe there's follow-up questions. And then I will ask two words that a critic would use to describe them. Mm-hmm.
So a friend and a critic.
Right.
Oh, nice.
And we know that people are, typically their answer is how they view themselves in the first person. So, but it gives them a little fig leaf to say, I don't think, I really suck. A critic might think I really suck.
Yeah, it's basically changing the focus from the person, but rather from their view from the outside on this person, right?
Right.
Okay, nice. It's interesting how you're looking at trust. I like the way you said the trust is a currency, right? So it's not Bitcoin, but it's indeed the currency that you use to put everything in the right place and see. And I guess it's also the currency that's used by controlled intelligence. Like, okay, I trust you. I want to pay you. Just get out their information that I want. Let's go back to the second question. So about their tech. Yep. And we all live and look on the internet with all the AI working with the data that's available. And how does this AI and the possibility to process way more data and get insights from the data affect their security domain?
Well, it's really hard not to give a predictable answer here, because so many people are talking about this, and it still remains to be seen the ultimate outcome from a positive or a negative standpoint. Mm-hmm. I think it is very apparent to me that there's tremendous value that can be gained from AI technologies and the ability to find things that maybe humans wouldn't be able to see, put together, or do so in an expedited fashion where it can really make a tremendous impact. Mm-hmm. I think AI can help us scale in ways we can't even possibly imagine, and find efficiencies and new ideas and thoughts and technologies and medicines and all kinds of things. The flip side, right, it can also cause proportional levels of destruction. And so I think, for security, being a security practitioner versus being an adversary, a threat actor, what have you, it has historically always been a game of cat and mouse. And I think that AI is really no different. AI is a tool, just like anything else. How you use it is what matters. Mm-hmm. I think one of the X factors here is that AI is only going to be as effective as the quality of the data that it has to build its knowledge base in order to make whatever decisions it's going to make. And I think that the data and the tradecraft of practicing security is going to be really important to continue having humans as part of that process. Because if you expect a human analyst or human security practitioner to act with integrity, and you're using an AI technology to do the same job, the integrity piece is going to be really hard to quantify or measure. And you don't know how the AI is going to evaluate that in every scenario. And so I think that human beings being part of that process from a security perspective is fundamentally always going to be necessary. And I also hope that humans' involvement in that technology is what keeps it working for our benefit, and not not allowing it to be unleashed on the world with unchecked consequences. At least that's my hope.
Can you give an example of their AI application in your domain? Because we all know they're ChatGPT, they're LLMs, right? But they're as a person who is a little bit further away from the security domain, just curious, what is their
I think there are great applications for insider threat use cases, and for companies that maintain an awareness of the telemetry of what's coming into the company and what's going out. And also, human beings have behaviors that are sort of known specifically to them. We establish patterns. All of us do that. And so I think one of the things you notice from an insider threat situation, and by the way, just to be super clear about this, not all insider threats are malicious. 60% of insider threat incidents are caused by an insider who does something either unwittingly or makes a mistake. And so I think AI has the ability to sit in that process where normally we would have human analysts relying on the accuracy of algorithms within certain softwares that are all, by the way, created as software applications independently. Even though they may integrate and APIs may connect, they're not all built the same way or taught the same things. And so if you have an AI who is working in tandem with a human analyst, analyzing the tremendous amount of data around endpoints, around firewall activity, around just even something as simple as the hours of operation or when a laptop is turned on versus when it's off, you have the ability to hone in on patterns. And then once you establish the baseline of those patterns, then you're looking for anomalies. It's exceptionally hard for humans and what was previously the UBA type enabled software, user behavior analytics types of software, to make that scale to where you're accurately detecting incidents that should be investigated or may be indicative of a problem versus the false positive, right? And that type of software historically has been riddled with false positives, a lot of white noise. And so that's an area where I think AI could be a really positive partner in security solutions. And I can think of a couple others, but you may want to talk more about that example. So
no. Well, actually, you mentioned a lot of white noise. What I see in the city is basically a number of events that are being detected, like millions, and then they drill down to tens of incidents that have been really worked on. So like the amount of white noise is very, very huge, and that you have to use tools to be able to get to the point where it's really need the human to work and see what was going on. And that's what I see in the city. Do you see in the college the same thing, or because you're CISO in the college, right?
Yeah, I'm the CISO at the college, and so that's kind of my half. I wear one hat as a professor. I wear the other hat as the actual security leader, digital information security leader for the company. It's a little different. The signal, the telemetry that you see in the higher education space, particularly because I'm at a small college, is much more limited and also a little less complex to have to discern what is known good versus what is unknown or bad, it's pretty clear. I think when you expand into much larger organizations, there are so many more variables that you have to account for. And so I don't want to say I have it easy. It's by no means is it easy, because higher ed has its own challenges, right? It doesn't have unlimited resources to throw at security problems or to build security and technical infrastructure. It has to work with what it has. And so the trick and the key, from my perspective, is to work smarter, not harder. And so identifying the right technologies to meet our specific use cases are extremely important.
Yeah. So we were talking about their security in their college, and there are a different set of questions, a different approach, or a different budget that you have compared to like companies Uber, Tesla, or the city of Kyiv. And there you approach their tool set differently, and their number of questions that you have to tackle as well.
Yeah. So first, risk is different, and you have to assess that risk for a higher ed entity is going to be different than a city or a large company. And I prefer, as a CISO, taking a risk-based approach to challenges, which then means we have to identify vendor tools that are very specific for our use case, because we can't afford every tool that's out there. So, working smarter, not harder, is the best way to approach this from my perspective. And it's also a requirement, because you don't have an unlimited budget or millions of dollars or an in-house team that's massively large to be able to throw at these challenges. And fortunately, it's also a smaller set of data and inputs and telemetry at a small college. It doesn't mean that it's an easy job. It also means that it does require you to utilize resources in a different way. I try and get students involved in the process as much as possible. One, for them to learn experientially in the degree program, and two, they're force multipliers for me. So that's tremendously helpful. And I suppose you have interns at companies, and maybe they're given opportunities to do real work sometimes. In an environment like higher ed, where I'm at, we give our students opportunities to do the actual work, because one, we need the help, and two, it's the best lab that they could possibly have to learn. Real life lab. Absolutely. Absolutely.
When we talk about their college, your current position, you were as a professor. How do you keep up your knowledge up to date? How do you understand what is there on their market in the tools? What are the new threats? Because their world is changing, right? It's not staying in one place. So how do you learn? How do you keep yourself educated all the time with the new things coming?
Fortunately for me, being an intelligence guy, a former intel officer, I love information. The more information I have, the happier I am to enable me to make good decisions. First and foremost, it starts with I hire people that are a lot smarter than me. You will inevitably learn something every day. And if I'm the smartest guy in the room, then we're probably all in trouble. I think the other thing is I rely on good sources of information, and information for me, it's not all created equal. When I think about intelligence, I'm looking for information that is authentic, that's corroborated, that also answers a need or follows, an area that I have direct benefit or interest in acquiring. So, I seek out very curated intelligence feeds, threat intelligence feeds. There are some entities that I trust because I have maybe a relationship or a history with them, and they have a great sort of track record of doing good work. That means a lot to me. I tend to be extremely loyal to vendors because if you do good work, then I'm going to keep working with you. So I think it's a combination of people that I can learn from each day, and also being very specific about where I get my news and information is helpful. I also subscribe to learning platforms. I take online courses, particularly in an area where I may need additional insight. I am not averse to becoming a student myself and brushing up on things or learning new technologies. And I think you have to do it. I think if you want to be relevant in the security space, because it is the cat and mouse game that it is, any wall that you build is inevitably, the adversary is going to find a way around it, through it, under it, whatever the case may be. You have to continue to learn what they're doing. If you don't, you will never be able to keep your wall as safe and secure as it possibly should be.
Yeah, the day you stop learning is basically the day you're out of your job.
I wholeheartedly agree, and it's truer in higher education, I think, perhaps than anywhere else. Although it's no less true anywhere else. The reality is this space moves as fast as lightning, and the threats typically do outpace the solutions. Most solutions tend to be reactive. They're built because a problem was identified. And so we want to prevent that from happening again. Where I really try and get organizations to focus their mindset is to be as proactive as possible in getting ahead of challenges. I find historically, inevitably, organizations that invest proactively spend far less resources than they spend being reactive from an incident. Not to mention you have the damage to reputation.
Right.
You have, all the things that come with that. So it's important to be proactive and also realize that it's really hard to be proactive because it requires you to constantly learn and develop and evolve.
You mentioned in our conversation several companies that you worked for, and obviously every company or team has been special. And what makes a company a great place for you to work for or to be there? As you said, it's not work anymore, it's a way more, but what makes a place great for you as a company, right?
Yeah, I've come to learn this about myself, that my motivation is doing work that benefits other people. It's a service mentality and mindset. I think about when I joined the agency, I was serving my country. I believe in working in higher education that I am serving the students. I am serving the community and even my industry by educating the next generation of talented, practitioners and leaders. That service element for me is incredibly important. Having worked in the private sector in companies that have valuable missions, don't get me wrong. Accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy is a great mission to have, and people at Tesla fundamentally believe that. I think the balance for me is that an organization that is also designed to make money has to properly balance that in its decision making, so that it's consistent with its mission. And I think I've found the most satisfaction in that balance in government service and then higher education.
It looks like in the government service and the higher education space, the distance between your activity and serving act is much closer and much shorter, right? So that
Yes.
you directly help people by teaching them or by running some operations that you did in the agency. Whereas in the Tesla case that you referred to, it takes some time to go from their idea or from their things that Tesla does through their selling on the market and finally getting their green energy that popular, because we see lots of electric cars these days, right? So they managed to accomplish that mission by making their electric cars popular, and that changed things. But whether there's a direct connection between your work and the work that, their big thing that they were doing. Yeah, it takes some time actually, way more.
So sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it is more indirect. And, all companies, when they get to the size of a Tesla, tend to require the same types of components in order to be successful. So running an insider threat investigations, intellectual property protection role at Tesla is important. If all the secrets walk out the door, then Tesla as a business is less apt to function, because the competitive edge becomes much narrower. In fact, maybe it aligns perfectly. And so now people may not want to buy Teslas anymore. They want to buy the exact copy, replica, knockoff, whatever it is. And that harms the business model. The interesting thing, which I always found interesting at Tesla, was that Elon didn't mind competition. He believed that more competition actually furthered the company's mission. And so, it's the reason why Tesla open sources so many of their patents, because they want others to take the technology and go make more electric vehicles. So, that was interesting to me. And at the same time, Tesla didn't want its information to be, it wanted to protect the information it wanted to protect. Right. And so that doesn't mean that just because it open sources patents, that everything needs to be available or visible to the public.
That's not how business works. That's not
Correct.
how business works.
Correct. And so there's value in that role, for sure. I think I prefer to be closer to mission impact and working directly with the people that I see benefit. And so working with students, or working in an intelligence field where the information you acquire, is going to a policymaker who gets to see that information. That's a real connection for me. And I think that human connection in the mission is what I've found to be most valuable, satisfying for myself.
I want to be mindful of your time. Therefore, I will jump to the last question that I typically ask people here who are the guests. But now I have to think how to formulate it, because typically I say, like, what do you like more, coding or managing? In the sense of software engineering. For you seems to be still very much connected with their working on security, and they're basically managing or teaching as a professor, right? So you have two hats, as you mentioned, and the third one, which is now on the podcast. I don't know when you wear it, in which case. But if you would have to choose one, what would you do? What would be your go in the serving phase, right, to work on something, or to be more at the role of like a professor or managing things or kind of thing?
This is easy for me. And it's the same when I think about when I was younger. Did I love playing the sport more, or do I love watching my kids play the sport, or coaching them and teaching them? And it's the same. It's the same for me as a practitioner. I was fortunate. I've been fortunate and blessed to enjoy a number of successes as a practitioner in my career, and tremendous experiences that I will treasure forever. And most people have no idea what those are because I can't talk about them. So that's okay. What I'll say is that the ability to teach, to invest in, to develop and see others reach their potential is far more satisfying to me than anything I could personally do. I'm much more interested in the we instead of the me. And there's a quote by President Harry Truman, who was the president of the United States at the tail end of World War II into the early 1950s, also from Missouri, where I'm from. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. But he said, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit.
Nice.
And that is something that I subscribe to, and I believe that the opportunity to work with students and invest even in employees, right, to develop and grow them to reach their full potential is, I think that's probably where I'm meant to be.
Nice. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for this conversation. And if people want to reach out to you, where do they find you? How do they approach you?
I am on LinkedIn and searchable there, connectable there, and more than happy to connect and chat. Also, which we didn't really mention, I'm an adjunct professor at CET University in Ukraine, teaching in the master's cyber defense program. I teach on insider threat, a course that I developed with a co-professor, Rachel Tenney. So I'm very much reachable through CET University here locally, and then also on LinkedIn for connection and discussion that way.
Thank you for being here. I enjoyed our conversation. hope you do.
Likewise.
So
yes, likewise. Alex, I really appreciate the time today, and it was great to talk about some of these issues.
And dear listeners, please don't forget to like and subscribe, because more guests are coming to this channel. I'm thrilled because I know some of them already. You don't, but if you don't want to miss them, just hit that button, and you'll get the notification as soon as the video is out. And thank you, Nick, once again, and talk to you one day. Ciao.
I look forward to it. Thanks.